Here for the February Town Hall meeting. I think there's slightly fewer people here than Thank you for coming back. I should mention, among the people who are here, is I have council members of Fremont, Raj Salwan and David Bonacorsi, Vice Mayor of San Jose, Magdalena Carrasco, and council member from Milpitas, Bob Nunez. Let's give all those elected officials a hand. And now to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and introduce the Congressman, your own Mayor, Lily May.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I also wanted to call everyone's attention. I also am joined here by my Vice Mayor, Rick Jones. But before we begin, I just wanted to say how important it is for us to have these opportunities to hold town halls, because it's a wonderful way for us to be able to hear from our citizens and to have the opportunity to share this exchange of both the input from the community as well as the feedback from our congressman. And I do want to applaud Congressman Khanna because he's been accessible and very successful in terms of this outreach to our community, which I think is so critical during these periods of time. I also want to welcome and appreciate how we have representatives from Milpitas and San Jose, because one of the things that makes us successful as a community in Fremont is our partnerships with our neighbors, whether they be neighboring cities or with neighboring residents. And so for all of the citizens in Fremont, as well as those who are visiting this evening, I welcome you to the city of Fremont. With that, I will listen to the pledge, and then I'll be happy to introduce Congressman Khanna. So please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, I wanted to comment how wonderful Congressman Khanna looks. For those of you who don't know, he also has recently had a growing family, much like our growing Bay Area. And he has welcomed a beautiful little boy, Soren. But thank you for holding this, and we look forward to this opportunity to hear from you about how we can best partner with the electeds, as well as here in our community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Lee May. Let's give the mayor a round of applause. Been an extraordinary partner and leader and extraordinary voice for the city in working on so many different issues. And I know we're working to get Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, here to see firsthand why we need more infrastructure investment. So I appreciate your leadership. We have some very special guests here today that I want to recognize. It's, of course, National Hispanic Heritage Month, and I will speak a little bit in more detail. I want to take your questions, but before we recognize the guests, I did want to talk about DACA and what's going on. Because to me, there's some things that are beyond politics. There's some things that are about moral conscience, about who we are as a people. And as a son of immigrants, I recognize so strongly that we're talking about real people's lives. I was at a press conference with all the Democrats, and a number of others, when the president announced his decision. And you had people there in tears. I mean, this is not a game. These are people who played Little League, graduated from high school, watched the same Friends and Seinfeld growing up. They're just as American as any of us. and then to be told by their president that there is something different about them. Forget what happens at the end, but what the president and what the country is saying is, you're not the same. And the impact that that has is just not who we are. And I really hope, if we really want to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, that Republicans and Democrats in Congress will get together and finally pass the DREAM Act and give these kids the rights they deserve as citizens in this country. We want to recognize our extraordinary leaders. And I say this because people often ask me, what does it mean to be Indian American? And I said, the biggest thing I think I can do for the Indian American community is be excellent as a congressperson for the entire community. And I feel like in honoring the people we are selecting for the Hispanic Heritage Month, their record of service has been, of course, one of pride to the Hispanic community, but much beyond, they have been excellent leaders for our entire community in Silicon Valley. And I'm so honored. Let's give that a round of applause. I'm so honored, first, to recognize the Honorable Ron Gonzalez, who give him a round of applause. The first year of Latino background of San Jose, his leadership at the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley for the past 8 years as well, and his dedication to championing educational excellence for low-income students. Thank you, Mayor, for the example you've set for many years in your public service. Now, my honor, recognize a friend, but also, I met Magdalena, and the first conversation she had was about her neighborhood, about her community, about what the needs of that community are. And she talked about what the tech community should be doing. And I was struck by someone who now is, of course, such a respected public official, but who has not forgotten her roots and her commitment to the local community. And so we honor you today for your public service as the first Latina vice mayor of the city of San Jose in over 30 years, representing the largest district of Latinos in Northern California, and authoring the historic wage theft policy, and your contribution in helping to create the Office of Immigrant Affairs in the city of San Jose. You're a real leader, and it's an honor to recognize you. My favorite people is the Honorable Bob Muniz. If the Republicans were all like you, I may actually vote Republican someday. Bob Muniz and I met also nothing to do with politics. He had me come out to care about math. And I noticed that he's an educator at heart, and he was working with kids, not in the district where he serves, but in San Jose, to give them an opportunity and a ladder up in STEM from young students up to high school. And I realized this is someone who really cares about making a difference. And today, it's such a privilege to recognize you and honor you for your public service as a Milpitas City Council member and former Milpitas Unified Board of Education and School Board member, your dedication to providing quality education, lowering student suspension rates, increasing graduation of Latino students as a former superintendent of the largest high school district in Northern California, your advocacy as co-chair of La Raza Roundtable, and if I can add, your civility in finding common ground in this county as a model for what we need in this country. It is such an honor to be able to recognize Superintendent Roxanne Fuentes. I believe that there is no work more important than those who are leading in education. And you have done so much in your career on education for educational equity. And so we want to honor you for your work in increasing student achievement and access to STEAM opportunities, as well as your leadership in the development of ethnic studies curriculum. It's just terrific to see your leadership on educational issues. It is a privilege to recognize the Honorable Sylvia Alvarez. Sylvia, thank you for being here. Thank you for your dedication for so many years. And your late husband, Deacon Salvador Alvarez, for 50 years, fighting for social justice and civil rights, as well as your work in founding the Advancing Latinx Achievement and Success Conference, and your public service as a board member of the Evergreen Elementary School District. Many of us younger folks are in your debt for your civil rights work in this community. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you. Teresa, please come on out. Teresa Castellanos has done so much work for so long in immigrant rights. But your work has never been more important than it is now. And you've been such a resource to our office and so many other offices around the county. And so we want to honor you for your 30 years of service to immigrant communities, including your work at the Santa Clara County Office of Immigrant Relations, and your work as a San Jose Unified School District and Metro Ed Board member. Thank you for being such a shining light in our community. Last but certainly not least, Marciela Gutierrez, who standing in for our service as Executive Director of Siren, a board member of the Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Project and Latino Advisory Member for the Oakland Museum, and for her dedication to grassroots community organizing, base building, leadership development, and fundraising, working primarily with multiracial, working class, and immigrant communities. I know Marciela has worked with Tom, Pike, and Chris in our office, and Siren has been such a resource to us. So please convey to her our congratulations and thank her and Siren for all the work that is being done. If we could get one picture with the entire distinguished group. get one more round of applause. My favorite part of the job is I get to brag about what an extraordinary district it is, and you've seen an example of why. And I do want to say, I know a lot of you are honored or very busy as vice mayor and other things, so you will not hurt my feelings if you don't stay for the entire town hall. So you have a whole pass to leave whenever you want, as with any of our distinguished elected officials. I want to be brief because really this time is meant for you, and I'm glad we have, when we first had the February town hall, we had 1,000 people. And then Chris Mullen, my district director, he doesn't have a lot of great ideas all the time, and sometimes he has good ideas. He says, really you should do one of these town halls and let people know you're going to do one in every city, so that people don't feel compelled to drive from Santa Clara to come up to Ohlone College, if they know that eventually the town hall will come to them. And I'm really glad we now still have a great enthusiasm, but we also have a more manageable crowd, so we can actually have a conversation and hopefully have everyone get a chance to express their point of view. I was asked by the press this morning, what did I think of the young students who were protesting Nancy Pelosi on DACA? And I said two things. I said, one, I think it's extraordinary. That's our democracy. And it's courageous to have folks, many of whom are undocumented, out there at the risk of their own arrest, standing up for what they believe. I also think that Pelosi, on this issue, is deeply committed, as are so many of us, to making sure that the Dreamers stay in this country. And I have no doubt that in the conversations with the Republican leadership and the president, she will do everything possible to make sure that there is a path to citizenship for Dreamers. And I think it's great to see that activism. The second thing I want to address is this Cassidy-Graham bill. It is like Groundhog Day. I mean, the amount of time wasted on efforts to repeal and take away health care insurance for millions and millions of Americans. And what I find most disturbing is the lies. I mean, just say you want to save money and don't want to insure people. And be honest. But don't pretend that you're going to take away money from states and somehow everyone else is going to be insured. I mean, just be honest about what the agenda is. We cannot, until this president is there, until the Republicans have a majority, we cannot be complacent, because they are going to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act at every opportunity they get. I am hopeful and confident that we will defeat this. I have hope, frankly, in John McCain, who has said that he will not be for a bill that didn't go through the regular process. He will not be for a bill that is purely partisan. And I hope he will have the courage of his convictions, because nothing has changed between the speech he gave back then and this bill. If anything, this bill is worse, with no coverage for pre-existing conditions, with taking away more money for the Medicaid expansion. But I hope all of you who care about healthcare, who have spoken out about healthcare, will continue to speak out, because it is the citizens in this country that defeated first version of Trump Care, and I hope and am confident that we will continue to defeat it and work ultimately towards a health care, which I believe, which is Medicare for all, which is really the long-term solution for lower premiums and better coverage for all Americans. The final point before I open it up to conversation is on foreign policy. I don't remember in my lifetime, forget a president, but an American politician making the kind of speech that the president made at the UN to an international audience. I mean, I was thinking, I don't remember another example of that. And you wonder what he's thinking, because I had a meeting with George Shultz at the Hoover Institute, one of the most conservative places in Stanford. No one's going to call George Shultz the dove. George Shultz was a warrior in the Reagan administration as Secretary of State. And he said that the only solution with North Korea is bilateral diplomacy. We have no military solution. The minute that we were to engage in a military escalation with North Korea, millions of people in Seoul would be killed. And our troops there would be killed. And Japan would be threatened. And if you ask the people whose lives are at stake, people in South Korea, it's no coincidence that the president of South Korea wants us to engage in bilateral diplomacy. The congresswoman from Guam wants us to engage in bilateral diplomacy. Because for those folks, this is real. They understand that the biggest risk of war is a miscalculation. And so the Congress has to reassert our authority on foreign affairs, to speak clearly on matters of war and peace, to repeal the authorization of force that was given in 2001 and still hasn't expired, to call for a diplomatic solution and bilateral negotiation in North Korea, and to make sure that we change our policy in Yemen. I am going to be bringing out a war powers resolution to force a vote in the United States Congress on what we're doing in Yemen. It's unconscionable. We are fueling Saudi Arabia's warplanes to bomb civilians in Yemen, to fight a proxy war with the Houthis in Iran. And we're doing it without a debate. The American people don't know we're doing it because the leadership of Congress refuses to bring it for a vote. So we're going to force a vote with a war powers resolution to put every person on the House on record on where they stand about whether we really should be arming or refueling Saudi planes in the intervention in Yemen. One final note before opening it up to your questions. I was on a letter about the situation in Myanmar to the leader in Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, making it very clear that we cannot in any way condone or tolerate what's going on there. A systematic ethnic cleansing or an expulsion of the Muslim population. I grew up admiring Aung San Suu Kyi, and she won the Nobel Prize. And for her to live up to that, she needs to take a stand against what's going on and stand up for the rights of the persecuted Muslim population. I know Raj Salwan reached out to me on this, and I know the Fremont City Council is also working on this, and I think we need to speak with one voice as a country about human rights there. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. Okay. Okay.
All right. So before we get started, I'm required to point out that your exits are here. Should there be a sudden loss of cabin pressure, nothing's going to happen. So the way we look at this is, if you have a question, not a speech, but a question that you would like to ask on some issue, please stay in your seat, wave your hand, and attract attention of the nearest staffer. Back there, we have not any. So for sort of that back quarter, from the middle over to the middle back. Up here, we have Tom. Back there, we have Vanessa. And up here, we have Al. And if you have a question, wave your hand, come over. They'll probably ask you what the question is because we don't want all the questions to be in the same topic. And then when it will go around, when it's your turn, please let the staffer hold the mic and then ask your question. Congressman will chat with you, and then we'll move on. And the goal, of course, is to get as many people's different questions answered as possible. As you know, we're supposed to be out of here an hour from now. So it is the usual situation that not everyone gets to ask a question, but we'll try to do as many people as we possibly can. Staffers have also pointed out to me that we now have a frequent flyer program. Some of our highly engaged citizens who go to every single town hall meeting and want to ask a question every time. One of the reasons we hold it in different locations is hopefully the local people will get to ask a question. So if you are recognized as a frequent flyer, please understand if the staffer doesn't call. And with that, who's ready? Which staffer is ready? Allie is ready with the first question.
Good evening. This is Jennifer from Newark with a question about the DREAM Act.
Hi, first I just want to say I'm a big fan. I like almost everything you do, but nobody's perfect. So my question is, with the aid package to Texas for Harvey, why didn't you attach a Clean Dream Act to it?
I appreciate the question. I think the negotiation that the Pelosi and Schumer engaged in with the president, that all Democrats voted for, was to keep the government open, one, not to default on the debt, partly because I think there are people on the Democratic side, the caucus, and it's a philosophical argument, who believe that we should be a responsible governing party, that we shouldn't mimic the tactics of Ted Cruz and hold the government hostage and try to shut down government, because we believe actually government can do good, that government can be effective. So we have a higher burden to show that we can govern. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that people who were suffering in both the hurricanes, Harvey and Irma, had relief. I don't think the president or the Congress would have agreed. I mean, Pelosi tried to push, to link it to the DREAM Act, and the consequence would have been, if we had held our ground, a potential government default and a potential shutdown. And we felt that, and the leadership felt that that was not responsible governance, that we would clearly fight for the Dreamers to be citizens and stay in this country as the highest priority, but we were not going to hold the aid hostage and hold the operation of government at a time when there was hurricane relief necessary hostage to achieve that end. There are a few people who disagreed with that, but that was the rationale.
We have a question here from Syed from Fremont. This question is on Myanmar.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for supporting the Myanmar refugees. I think it's a very severe crisis. We have enough natural disasters going on that we don't need to have man-made disasters on top of it. My question to you is, there is a Senate Resolution 250 going on in support of the refugees. Are you supporting it?
If you look, so what I've done, Jamie Raskin in the House has led a letter, which I'm on, which is called on the Myanmar government to stop the ethnic cleansing and to listen to Kofi Annan's recommendations. I certainly would support refugees and taking in refugees. I haven't seen the House version of the legislation. If you let Vanessa know, I'd be happy to support that legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Congressman. This is Ahmad, and another question on Myanmar.
Well, sir, good to see you. We met at the campaign trail. Nice to see you again. Thanks for all the good work you're doing. Appreciate it. So we appreciate the letter that you're on. That's a very good start. But this has been going on since last August. We're already almost in October. I think we're beyond the letters. We're beyond the resolution from UN. It's pretty much useless. I think the time has now come for you to take a leadership role and put a strongly worded resolution out there that this madness has to stop at once and push UN peacekeeping forces towards that. Because as we speak here, people are dying, women are being raped and maimed. So this really has to stop. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I do support a strongly worded House resolution and the role of UN peacekeeping to be there in Myanmar. I think that's the appropriate role for the United Nations. It would be most appropriate if it was led by someone on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but there are a number of folks who I will talk to when I go back who could lead such a resolution, and I'm certainly happy to support that type of an effort.
Over here. We have a question from Ali of Santa Clara about the Federal Reserve.
Thanks for holding this town hall, Congressman. While this nation's being distracted by identity politics, a powerful destructive force is marching us toward destruction. The military-industrial complex has spiraled out of control, taking our wealth, liberty, and security with it, while enriching those who profit from the war. Congress has consistently given a blank check to the Department of Defense, who in turn have lost track of some $18.5 trillion since 1995, according to a report uncovered by a FOIA request. There is no oversight or accountability. Of course, none of this would be possible without the Federal Reserve, which, contrary to what its name implies, is not a federal agency. It is a private for-profit bank. War and debt go hand in hand, and with debt comes slavery. The gargantuan federal government consumes some 50% of all income in the form of revenue to support its addiction to war, debt, and the domestic police and surveillance state. Kids born today will not know what it's like to walk onto a school campus without a surveillance camera staring them back in the face, or knowing that their letters and calls are being recorded. Is this the future world that we want to leave for them? What is your plan to dismantle these criminal organizations? Thank you.
Well, I agree with some of the substance of the points, if not the rhetoric and the phrasing. I don't think our military, I wouldn't describe them as criminal. That said, I did vote against the increase of funding for the Pentagon. I'm on the House Armed Services Committee. I have great respect for our troops, I have great respect for the military, but this idea of increasing the military budget by another $67 billion was wrong. And so I was one of the members who said I'd rather be putting that money into education, into infrastructure, into building this country, than further increases on our defense budget. I have also called for ending the war in Afghanistan. There is one strategy. We need to leave. We have been there for 16 years. President Obama had a 30,000 troop surge. At the time, the Taliban controlled 10% of Afghanistan. Now the Taliban controls 40%. I don't understand what sending 4,000 more troops is going to do that 30,000 troops couldn't accomplish. That is a huge drain on our military. Elizabeth Warren and I worked on a bill, because she's on an amendment, she's on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate and I'm on the House, to make sure that we scrutinize defense contractors that are often monopolies and are overcharging the Defense Department at the expense of taxpayer money. And there is waste and abuse there. So I believe that we do need a reform of our defense budget. We need a reform of our overseas interventions to restore the military to its proper purpose, which was safeguarding our national security, and to respect and honor the men and women who serve and sacrifice in the military.
Alex from Fremont has a question about transgender military policy.
Hello, Congressman Ro Khanna. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for coming out here to speak with everyone and address all these issues. I'd like to say that I identify with the LGBT community and I have many friends who do as well. Some of those friends are in the military, and with recent events such as Harvey, Irma, and DACA, the transgender issue in the military has fallen behind and not many people speak of it much longer. However, it's still a very big issue with those who are threatened by the president's actions regarding such. My question to you is, do you have any proposal or plan to help out these very mentally and physically able men and women in our military?
Well, Alex, thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking out. Let me tell you, it's not forgotten among any of us in Congress. We are appalled with the decision that the president announced on Twitter without any consultation from Secretary Mattis, who I can tell you, behind closed doors, would not support a policy of discrimination. And many of the military leaders wouldn't support it and don't support it in their hearts, because they've always viewed the military as an institution that helps build integration. And to have men and women who are serving with distinction be discriminated because of who they are is just un-American. And so there are members of Congress on both the Democratic and Republican side who are pushing the military not to implement the policy. As it is, the military has said that they are not going to kick out any existing members, but they're still not ruling out discrimination against prospective members. And so we are working on legislation. The good news is that when Congress and the Republicans tried to pass a transgender ban in Congress, that failed, because there were enough Republicans also who voted against it. And so I am hopeful that Congress will pass legislation making it very clear that every American, regardless of their identity or background, and certainly everyone in the LGBTQ community, should be able to serve in the military. But I assure you, Alex, that it's on the minds of the Democratic caucus, and it is not lost given all the other issues, because it's a core principle of this country.
Thank you. Congressman, we have a question here from Shuja from Fremont on Myanmar.
Thank you, Congressman. Actually, I've been bugging you for this Myanmar thing through emails and stuff. And actually, the letter that you wrote, I saw today, was very comprehensive, very nice. And then I think 24 members of Congress signed it. So I would like to give you a round of applause on that. As I said, my name is Shuja Ahmed, and I'm the president of an organization called MAP, Muslim Americans for Peace and Prosperity. You have attended one of our events also. We had just this Myanmar situation, we had done a protest about like 10 days ago. And I've been bugging you and even bugging this Fremont City Council members and everybody else also. Sorry if I've been a little too much. But there was like, about 300 or 400 people showed up, and women, children, they were all, doing the slogans and all that. It's nothing directly affects us, but, as our, Fremont multi-ethnicity culture really care about, it's not only just the local, even global, where people are being slaughtered. Now, my question to you is there something else can be done? Like, we had a petition filed, about 700 people signed, like, making, conditioning U.S. aid to Myanmar attached to the safety of Myanmar or Rohingya civilians, or, give more aids to Bangladesh, who is really already poor people with limited land, geographical, capacity. They're still taking more people. And then other things is like, probably, in the letter it shows that you are putting pressure, not even pressure, but, asking Aung Suu, who's the de facto leader of Myanmar, to react on this and do something about it. So those were the questions, like, can you, if they don't listen, they still keep slaughtering people. can we go a little, further up and, do these sanctions?
Well, Suja, thank you for being here, and certainly you're not too persistent. This is a huge issue, and I admire your mobilization and your speaking out and making sure that this is on the radar of not just your member of Congress, but the City Council and other members of Congress. This isn't just an issue for those who may have a heritage that traces back to a region, but it's an issue of who we are as a country. Americans, we don't believe that the systematic expulsion or cleansing of ethnic communities is justified, period. We believe that you have to respect and recognize human rights. And if there is a regime that is engaged in ethnic cleansing or engaged in violence and killing, the United States can in no way be supporting it with aid or supporting it in any form. And so we have called for the cessation of the violence. We have called for allowing the UN and Kofi Annan's foundation and plan to have an input. I think if that is unsuccessful, then we need to consider some of the options that you mentioned in terms of looking at the aid that we're giving the government and see what points of pressure can be applied. But I encourage you to continue to speak out, to reach out not just to me, but to other members of Congress. And frankly, I don't think this is a partisan issue. I think you may find support on both sides of the aisle for this position. Do you have a follow-up?
Just one.
Yeah.
Yeah, following up on that, we are also planning to do a vigil probably in mid-October, and we are going back and forth with your staff to probably have your presence over there also. That we appreciate it.
That's great. It's a good tactic to ask me to come in front of
Congressman, this is Roland.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me here. The question I have is revolves with many people in this country who did not vote for the Democrats, who did for the Republicans and Trump in particular. They had legitimate, I think, or they felt that they felt legitimate complaints. What do you do to try to address concerns that they may have that may be about inequality or loss of opportunities or things like that? How would you address those?
I think that's a very well put statement. 63 million people voted for Donald Trump, and Trump told them he was going to bring them back, that he was going to bring back communities that had lost manufacturing, that had lost coal, that he was going to bring back their pride, bring them back and provide a sense of economic hope and opportunity. And these are communities, some of them who felt that the country, the direction, the policies were not working for them. We have to, I think, provide a plan, an aspiration of what they or their kids can do to have a better life, a better future, to be part of the American dream. I think there's several things that the Democrats can talk about. First, we need to talk about the stagnation of wages in this country. The fact that for the last 40 years, the wages for middle class and working class Americans has stayed flat, while the wealthy, because of globalization and automation and other things, have gotten a disproportionate amount of wealth. And instead of having President Trump's policy, which at its best, I mean, his argument is, if you cut corporate taxes and you cut taxes for investors, that they will invest this money and we will see wage increases. And I said, it's a pretty convoluted way. Why not just give the tax credits to the working people. That would be a much more direct way of having wage increases. And so Sherrod Brown and I have a bill that would provide a 20% raise for working families up to $75,000. You would get a tax credit back for about 20% to make up for the stagnancy of wages for the last 40 years, so that people are actually earning what they deserve. And then we need to talk about Social Security and the fact that some of these folks, we have to be honest. I've been to Paintsville, Kentucky, and I've talked to Tim Ryan in Youngstown, and these folks understand what's going on. They understand that it's a hard transition. And we have to say, if you lose your job at 52, 53, at least there should be dignified retirement for the work you've done. People are talking about raising the Social Security age when folks are losing their jobs in midlife. What we need to be doing is strengthening Social Security so people can have a dignified retirement. And we need to make sure that we're providing health care for them so that they don't have to worry about their health care. But then we need to talk about the future for their kids. When I was in Paintsville, Kentucky, you could have had the same round table here in Silicon Valley. And those kids of coal miners, they wanted to learn Apple Swift software. And they wanted to learn how to be an app developer. They wanted to learn the new skills of advanced manufacturing. Why? Because they want to participate in the new economy. They want to have a sense of aspiration. And I think we need leaders who are going to be honest. Who are going to say, it's hard. This transition that this country is going through is difficult. But we're not going to make false promises. We're not going to promise to bring back jobs that may not come back. We are going to invest in the future. We're going to help young folks have the opportunity for the jobs that are going to exist. And I have enough confidence in the people I met that if we are honest about the transition, and if we have a vision for how their kids can participate in it, and if we provide those ladders, that they will believe. But we need to have people in our own industry, and tech industry, care more and do more to see some of the folks who don't feel part of this new economy. So I think it's a complicated question, but I think this is the central question that we need to be able to answer to knit our country back together. Because long after Trump is gone, that doesn't mean income inequality will be gone. That doesn't mean the unequal access of opportunity will be gone. That doesn't mean that we will have an answer for what a steel worker's kid is going to do. These are the questions, I believe, that the Congress ought to be worried about and answering instead of voting every 2 weeks about repealing Obamacare.
Robbie from Fremont has a question about immigration.
Excuse me, I asked to speak a long time ago. This guy is skipping me because he doesn't want me to ask questions about immigration.
Well, next question after him.
No, you're skipping me.
Well, we'll make sure you get your question answered.
You want to? Sure.
Okay, go ahead. Then we'll get you two. Yes.
All right.
Try to mix it around.
I think it's great to have compassion for the 800,000 DACA people. But the fact is, our labor force participation is in the basements. It's 63. Other countries have 80%. And, okay, 800,000 DACA people need compassion. We have 8.5 million guys between 25 and 54 who can't find a stinking job. We got 20 million people out of the workforce. And I can give you an example of what's going on. In Fremont, you got people that snuck into the country who are working 70 hours a week for $5 an hour at Tesla. You got a school here in Fremont that's cheating on our visas. When the students flunk, they just gave them a W, And then you got EFI that's paying Bangladeshis $1.21 an hour. The CBO, the CRS, they're all nonpartisan government entities, and the NAS all have come to the conclusion that immigration may boost the GDP, but individuals are suffering. Harvard professor Borjas says there's a $500 billion being sucked out of the lower class and going into business owners' pockets because of immigration. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to get our labor force participation up to 80%, and put people in jail, like the guy that had the $5 workers at Tesla, the guy that paid $1.21 at EFI, and the school that's cheating on ours. And as far as saying STEM jobs are going to save the world, there are no STEM jobs for Americans. Only 1 out of 4 people that have a STEM degree have a STEM job. There are so many stinking H-1Bs in this country. It's appalling. And I met people who were H-1Bs at your last meeting. They became an H-1 Indian gal who was a Google employee. She was an H-1B. When she became an American citizen, they fired her ass. There was a Chinese guy that came up to me and said he was working at Intel, and when he became an American citizen, they fired his ass. And that's what's going on with this country, and Washington is looking the other way.
I appreciate your passion, sir, and I think you raised certain points that are valid. There is no question that there has been an abuse of the H-1B visa program. And I'm on a bill, a bipartisan bill, the Durbin-Grassley bill, and I've worked in the House on a bipartisan basis on that bill that makes it very clear that if you're coming on an H-1B visa, you need to be paid a prevailing wage. You can't be undercutting the wage of American workers. It's one thing if you're paying $120,000, which is the prevailing wage in this area, but it's not acceptable if you're paying $60,000 or $70,000 because that's not fair to the H-1B visa holder, and it's not fair to the American workers. It's just benefiting the corporations.
What happened at Disney?
So my point is, if you look at the Durbin-Grassley legislation, it's online. I'm the original introducer of it, among others, in the House. It would reform the H-1B visa program. I believe there is zero tolerance for a race to the bottom, which benefits corporations and is exploitive of the immigrants coming in and is also undercutting American labor. We need to be a country welcoming immigrants because immigrants, I do think, produce jobs, create jobs, but not at the exploitation and undercutting of the American labor market. And I think that is, by and large, my view, the view of most Americans across this country. They recognize that we're a country of immigrants. They want and welcome immigrants. They don't want immigrants being exploited and replacing American workers for corporations to make more profits. I think that that can be a common sense principle that has reform. But I also think, sir, that we need to do a lot more to create jobs. We need to do a lot more to create jobs. You know, of the jobs from 2005 to 2015 that were created, 9.3 million were jobs that were independent contractor or temporary jobs. The country actually lost 300,000 jobs of regular employees. All the economic growth and job creation was in independent contractors. We have got to have the National Labor Relations Board and our laws protect employees more and allow them to collectively bargain and to have more rights and not just be treated as independent contractors because they don't have the same wages and benefits. We need to invest in infrastructure that would create a tremendous amount of jobs. When Donald Trump won, I opposed him with every fiber of my being. I thought at least he'd want to build stuff. At least he'd say, let's build things so we could spend and create jobs. We need to figure out how we invest in creating federal technology zones in this country, advanced manufacturing and robotics and renewable energy. We used to be able to do a lot of things as a government to create jobs. So I agree with you that immigration needs to be reformed, but I also think we need a better economic policy that doesn't just obsess about tax cuts for shareholders, tax cuts for corporations, and gears our policy towards investment in what's going to create jobs for the middle class in the working class. And if we did that, we would have better employment. So those are my answers.
This is Naren from Fremont with a question about support for the United Nations.
Oh, sorry. So, Ro, I've known you for a number of years. I came here 50 years ago. So seeing a young person like you do what you've done, we're all proud of you. My question, although I'm an entrepreneur and I know some people, including him, is unhappy, and I understand it. There is no question that some jobs have been lost. But my question is much broader about United Nations. United Nations was formed in San Francisco 70-some years ago. And yes, it has some problem. But yes, we have avoided several potential world wars. And whatever is going on with Nikki Haley and Ambassador, and at least discussion is going on to avoid the miscalculation you talked about for North Korea. So for Mr. Trump, and not opposed by Congress, go and say just because we pay 22% of United Nations budget, which is just few $1 billion, we're spending trillions of dollars in wars, and not allowing that kind of possibility, or at least avoid wars just because miscalculation. If there's no discussion, what will happen? Somewhere or the other, somebody is going to misunderstand somebody, especially with Twitter feeds, then we will have bigger problems. So should Congress find some way to very strongly say that they believe in the fundamental United Nations and should not allow this kind of talk?
I agree with you. I think that it's always been American leadership in the world in the post-World War II era has been one of helping set up international institutions, help set up international framework, to encourage diplomacy, to encourage and make sure we don't make the mistakes that led to World War I and World War II. That was the advancement of human civilization and a great source of American pride. And I think what has happened, in part, to the gentleman's point about people being so frustrated in this country, that they feel, that legitimately feel, that they are working harder, they want to work, and they're not getting a shot. And they're not getting a shot for their kids. And they don't have that economic opportunity. And you have had, in that void, politicians step up and engage in demagoguery, saying the reason that you don't have jobs is because of globalization. The reason you don't have jobs is because of, and fill in the blank, a simple slogan. But what we need to do is really say, look, we understand that we failed policies of why there haven't been job creation, but let's address those. Let's not give up the very core principles that make our nation exceptional, which is a commitment to human rights, a commitment to immigrants from around the world, a commitment to diplomacy, that is who we are as Americans, and we need to change policies that have privileged corporations and help working Americans, and then I think they will believe in supporting things like the United Nations.
Hi, Congressman. We have a question here from Mohammed on immigration.
Hi, Congressman Khanna, thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Kamran. My question is a broader one. I'm going to do my best real quickly to try to explain what I'm feeling. So one of the questions raised for immigration was over here by a gentleman. I came as a foreign student. I went through the whole process, F1 student visa, OPT, H1B. That's how I became to work, and now I'm an American citizen, proud to be here. I guess my question is this: when I look around, I definitely believe in DACA. I think all the dreamers belong here. They're part of the American fabric. Anybody that's working over here, contributing to our economy, paying taxes is part of the American fabric. What would you tell a person like me that followed all the rules? And I feel like the government won't even let go of a parking ticket that I had. But what do you tell a person like me who's followed all these rules, and I sit over here and I look around and I say, okay, there might be a chance that people who may certainly not have followed the rules, I'm not talking about DACA, I'm talking in general, overall picture, who may not have followed all these rules, may cut the line and be in front of me. I shouldn't say in front of me, but have a path, the same path that I worked so hard all my life. What would you say to a person like me? Because I would be sitting over there twiddling my thumbs and be feeling, this is really unfair. Once again, it's just a higher level question. It's more like a philosophical question. Maybe it's really addressed to Trump, Donald Trump, and not necessarily you. But I'm just curious what a person like me would like to hear. I may be thinking it's really unfair. Just a general question. Thank you.
I appreciate the question. You don't have to apologize for it. It's a understandable point of view. I don't think anyone in the country has said that those who are undocumented and having a path to citizenship should jump to the head of the line. I think the question has been, let's have a path to citizenship. But all of the comprehensive immigration proposals have said that they shouldn't jump ahead of the line, that they should have a path to get there. That was Obama's comprehensive immigration proposal. I also believe that we need to, and HR 392 does this, get rid of the country quota for green cards, which is one of the reasons that there's been such a backlog, that there's some folks here who have a 70-year wait to get a green card or become citizens. And that's not in the interest of immigrants, it's not in the interest of American workers, because it keeps folks in a stature of an H-1B visa, which allows corporations actually more leverage. I'd much rather we have folks coming here on green cards or make them citizens so that they have more leverage with corporations, and that you don't put downward pressure on wages. And I think that would do that. So it's a very emotional issue, obviously, immigration. But I'll tell you what, I wish there were more conversation in this country like the one we're having here, where you had a gentleman passionate about his views, and you're passionate about your views, and at least we're talking, and we're trying to figure something out about what would respect American values and be common sense and get us forward. I think the problem in this country is we've stopped talking to each other. We've stopped listening to each other. We've stopped having any sense of common purpose. And sometimes I wish that we had more of the kind of conversation that we have often in my district, in these town halls, in the United States Congress.
Hi, Congressman. This question's from Elizabeth.
Hi. So when the Republicans are in the position that the Democrats are in right now, so a large minority, they seem to be able to be much more effective at stalling and keeping things from happening and getting their way. And, I'm not saying that we want Democrats to behave as badly as Republicans have sometimes have, but there's a lot of really bad things happening, especially around environmental issues with, monuments being opened up to oil and gas drilling. And I'd like to see you guys, find these obscure parliamentary maneuvers that nobody's ever heard of and do some stuff to do some blocking. And I'm not talking about blocking just for the sake of blocking. Anytime there's a Republican who wants to do something that's good, that's great that you want to work with them. I think that's fabulous. But I'm talking about blocking evil stuff.
I appreciate that. I actually think a large part, and I'll answer your questions on the environment, that hasn't been the case, but a large part of the Trump's agenda so far has been blocked. I mean, we blocked healthcare. We're hopefully going to block this absurd tax reform plan. He hasn't gotten a lot through Congress so far. So much so, I think that's why they keep bringing up repeal and replace. I don't think they even care anymore what's in the bill. They just want to win. because he just says, get me a win. I really think that's what Trump's modus operandi is. I don't think, because I want to win. I don't care what's in it. So I do think we've been effective in blocking things. We've been effective when Pelosi negotiated for the budget of this year. The Democrats got almost 95% of our priorities. We had EPA fully funded. They wanted to cut it. We had funding for most of the agencies and most of the programs. We killed the idea of funding for a border wall in this year's budget. But I hear your point. One of the biggest areas where the Trump administration has done damage is on the environment. Not just in the withdrawal of the Paris Accords, but there has been, unfortunately, legislation that has passed the House that has weakened the Clean Air Act. There has been legislation that has passed on strictly party line votes. There has been a series of executive orders that has undone basically all of Obama's executive orders on clean air, on clean energy. And it's not for a lack, we've tried this war powers resolution I'm bringing is a parliamentary procedure to force a vote, even when the Republicans aren't allowing it there. So it's not for a lack of parliamentary procedure, it's a lack of sufficient Republicans standing up for basic environmental protection. So what can we do? One, of course, we need to have a branch of government. I mean, it's very hard when you have overwhelming majorities on voting for this. The other is that there is some ray of hope in a bipartisan caucus on climate change, where the Republicans, and I mean this with sincerity, it takes courage because they have said that climate change exists and is a man-made issue. And that is a big step for a number of these Republicans. And they're open, 25, 30 of them, to at least working on some solution. One of the Republican solutions, I don't fully agree with it, it's a carbon tax and give all that money back in a dividend, but it would be better than nothing. And so my hope, in addition to, I agree with you, and we have not had a situation where you've had Democratic defections supporting this. The Democratic Party has been unified in opposition and trying to oppose at almost every step on these type of policies. But my hope is that we can continue to work with a new generation of Republicans who do get it, that this is not a partisan issue if the state of the planet is affected. The hurricanes aren't going to distinguish between Democrats and Republicans, that they will do something constructive on this issue. But I understand your frustration. It's one of the most disheartening things I've had to do in the House is see the scoreboard on the top of bills passing that are stripping the EPA or stripping away environmental regulations, stripping away open lands or monuments. And it's been one of, I think, the worst impacts of this administration today.
Ro, Allison of Newark has a follow-on environmental question with a different kind of perspective.
Hi. Recently we just finished a really tumultuous legislative session in California, and at the very end, 3 major environmental bills were tabled, largely because of lobbying from the energy-producing unions. My question is, and I believe that they were rightfully, not that they disagreed with the legislation, but they were trying to protect the jobs of their union members. What can we, and I'm sure the same problem exists in other energy-producing states, what can we do to incentivize unions to support environmental legislation by giving them a pathway to new jobs in the green energy field?
I think it's a great question, because I think that's what we need to do. When you go, and I visited coal country in Paintsville and in parts of Appalachia, they understand that they want to diversify their economy. They just want respect for the contributions that they or generations have made to America. And they They want to have some pathway for their future. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to give them a sense of economic possibility, of economic opportunity, whether that's infrastructure spending, whether it's spending on creation of alternative energy jobs, whether it's spending in other types of jobs in advanced manufacturing or robotics or product design or user support that takes their skills, recognizes that and gives them economic opportunity, whether it's making sure that they have a wage supplement so that they're not losing out in this transition. I think this is our challenge. And I think part of the challenge in the election, candidly, is that we did not have a sufficient understanding, empathy for their fear, their anxiety of generations and what their economic future was going to be. I think starting as you did, by acknowledging that, by not coming at it with a moral judgment, but coming at it as a collective issue for our nation to transition with everyone on board, would go a long way in helping get people more supportive of the type of environmental legislation we all hope to see.
Bring those unions to the table.
No, I mean, certainly having unions, as Debbie said, being stakeholders would make a difference.
This is Caroline from Fremont. Her question is about if the swing to Trump is viewed as a reaction to the Democratic Party governing, what will the Democratic Party do different when they regain power?
Hi, thank you. Good evening, Congressman. I've been in the United States for 19 years. I'm a French American, and I've been an activist resistance since the last election. And as I understanding, right now we are not moving forward. We are just politicians and Americans are pushing to keep what was working or what was the beginning of working, like Obamacare, about immigration. But I appreciate and all so far the issue and what you're saying and what I read about you. I agree, but I cannot we all know that the president we have is not the best, and but before him. I cannot, I still blaming the Democrat for, I still don't understand why how he has been elected, but I still blaming part of the Democrat because Democrat Party is a lot of people with a lot of different opinion and is a big branch. And my question is, I believe that because we are very down, I believe that soon the Congress will switch, but in your opinion, you and Democrat, do they understand that people are going to be more demanding of you? Because the Democrats were in the power before, and now, like me, a lot of Americans are more politically educated, and I learn more about politics here in the United States. And so do people in your party understand the big job is not right now, but ahead of you to be a better country even that before this government?
Well, I appreciate that perspective. And it's one of the things that maybe surprised me a little bit about Congress. I got there and there's some very fine people, patriotic folks, and they have this sense, they wear their pins in Congress, and there's a pomp and circumstance of the Capitol. And I said, you guys realize, we've got 11% approval here, all of us. It's not exactly a time for celebration. And, I met the French ambassador, coincidentally, a few days ago before I came back home. And he said something interesting. In France, with President Macron, 450 124 of the 577 parliamentarians were new. And they didn't elect the city council members, and they didn't elect the state assembly members. They elected musicians and artists and engineers to the parliament. We'll see how it works. But, you know, we've got a lower turnover in the United States Congress, the Economist article, than European monarchies. Now, Economist had an article. Re-election rate of incumbent members of Congress is 98%. That's why they don't always do town halls. I'm just, you know, being blunt. And I think the American people have woken up. I think this election in 2016 was an anti-institutional vote. They said the political class has failed. It's not working. It's not working for ordinary Americans. It's not working for us. And I think the bar, as you put it, is going to be very, very high for anyone in leadership, anyone that comes to power, to deliver, to actually do things that are going to improve the lives of working class and middle class Americans. And I think that there's going to be, the pendulum on these things often switches. I think there's going to be a greater demand for people who are going to tell the truth. Who are going to say, we can't just solve all of this by a magic bullet. There's not one magic fix. I mean, I love this idea of stronger antitrust law. I think it's important to break up banks, but there's not one fix to our problems. It's a tough transition, and we're going to have to, here are the few things we're going to do. And by the way, that's what FDR did. FDR said this idea of democratic experimentalism. I'm going to try different things. Not all of them are going to work, but I'm going to at least be bold to try to deliver. And I think the next people who come to leadership are going to be held accountable to that, or they should, you know, they'll be replaced, and people will continue to elect new people until they get it right.
There we go. As you can tell from the clock on the wall, we are in the final bonus round of questions. And it will be then Vanessa and Nanani and Tom. But before we do that, we just wanted to thank the staff here at Ohlone College, especially Pat Kabu. And thank all the officers from campus security and Fremont Police who are here tonight to keep us safe. And to let you know that the next, you know, these things are coming soon to a theater near you, so the next one will be October 18th in Cupertino. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Great. Congressman, we have a question here from Bowen from Newark on Medicare.
Well, actually, my question is more broadly on national debt. So our national debt just passed 20 trillion. And today, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the interest on the long-term debt occupy together more than 60% of the federal budget. They are called the mandatory spending. And in the next 75 years, Medicare Part A and Part B together have 30 trillion unfunded liabilities. So how can we talk about balancing the budget or reducing the national debt without talking about maybe a combination of raising taxes, raising the retirement age, and means testing the benefits? That's my question.
Well, we certainly have a $20 trillion deficit. But there are certain things we could do. We could make Social Security completely solvent into the indefinite future if we scrap the cap. Meaning, on salary over $250,000, people should continue to pay Social Security. And if we do that, it will be solvent into the indefinite future. The second thing is on Medicare. Now, there's no doubt that we are being ripped off by pharmaceutical companies, by hospitals, by insurance companies. How many people here have had a procedure at a doctor's office and then had the same procedure in the hospital, looked at your bill, and had the hospital bill be 10x? I don't know if you've had that experience, but you know, you go, you get an MRI or a CAT scan at your doctor's office, and then try getting that MRI or CAT scan at a hospital, and if you look at your actual bill, the same MRI or CAT scan that would cost $700 at a doctor's office will cost $10,000 at the hospital. 40% of medical cost is at hospitals, and they have a game where they bill Medicare and they bill insurance companies. They charge a facility fee at those hospitals. They bill them just to maximize. They have actually companies, consulting companies, that tell them how do you bill to maximize profits. Why is it that CEOs of some of these hospitals are making $6 million a year? I said that to someone, and they said, well, they're doing very complex things. I said, well, the president is making $450,000. And then I said, well, look who the president is. And I said, well, look, the president of Stanford, the president of Harvard, they're making $500,000 or $1 million. No one's making $6 million, $4 million. It's a racket. And the insurance companies, Aetna CEO making $28 million. That's where the cost is. That's why I'm for Medicare for all, because we want to eliminate that cost. It's the most fiscally responsible policy this country could have. But even if we don't get to Medicare for all, you want to have a bipartisan bill, I'll work with the Republicans to cut the costs of the hospital facility fees, to cut the costs of the drug companies overcharging, to cut the fraud or the costs of insurance companies just rubber stamping these $100,000 bills. Let's cut the costs. That's how we will tackle the deficit. And so I think this idea that we somehow have to raise the age of retirement and put more burden. You know, people say, well, what's the difference? Well, there's no difference if you work at Google, or if you had my life, you had a job in the administration, and you go to Congress, and okay, I'll be fine in my life. And okay, if I have to wait till 66 or 67, fine, there's no difference for me. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, what about the steel worker who got laid off at 51? You now want him to wait an extra year? What about the person who's making part-time, has 3 different jobs, and just clawing and taking Social Security at 62? We need more compassion, more support for our working class and middle class, and we can afford it. This country is rich enough to afford it.
Hi, Congressman. This is Isla, and she has a question regarding Israel.
My question is, why have we had and continue to have such strong relations with Israel? That's it.
I think I do think we should have a relationship and an alliance with Israel. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working towards peace and towards a recognition of the Palestinian state, towards a recognition of the suffering of Palestinians. I mean, there are things, I would say Israel's got a startup economy. There's a lot of Silicon Valley that has benefited from relationships with economically, and there's a huge expat community in the Bay Area. I don't think the question should be one of, do we have a relationship with Israel? The question should be, how does the United States act as a honest broker for peace in that area that recognizes the suffering of Palestinians, that recognizes the human rights. And I'll tell you, I support the U.S.-Israel relationship. I had some folks come to me, and I told them the same thing. They said, Ro, we need to outlaw the boycotting of Israel. And I said, I can't support that bill. And they said, why is that? I said, I wouldn't support boycotting our own government. I wouldn't support boycotting any nation. I mean, outlawing boycotting, that's a First Amendment right. We need to be able to recognize people's ability to have dissent and to be critical and to be honest about the human rights situation. I think there are an increasing number of people in Congress who have that perspective.
Just preliminary, I want to point out you've answered several questions earlier about Myanmar and we have some questions that are out here. Councilor Jamal has a letter to present to you afterwards, and maybe if the people that have these pending questions could join him afterwards, because rather than having a bunch of disparate questions all around. So I want you to be able to speak to the congressman, if there's time, hopefully. Real quickly, Nathan in West San Jose does have a question about affordable housing.
Is this the last question, Tom? Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, Congressman. Thanks for having the town hall tonight. My name is Nathan, and I'm a young professional, student, and renter in your district. Many of my peers and I struggle to find housing in the Bay Area due to the high demand, low supply, and lack of access to affordable housing. Recently, our state legislature passed some promising legislation that deals with this issue. Many of my friends and neighbors are excited to see our elected officials taking action to combat the current housing crisis. I would like to ask you, sir, do you support the passage of SB 35 and the larger housing package as a way of addressing California's housing shortage?
You know, I support affordable housing. I'll have to look at that bill because it's a state bill, so I honestly don't know all the details. I don't want to give an answer. But if you talk to Tom, and I'll happy to review that legislation. But the general principle, I definitely support more affordable housing built near transit communities. We have a problem is many people growing up here aren't going to be able to live here if we don't have more housing in areas that allow people to live on a teacher's salary, on a nurse's salary, on a clerk's salary, on a manufacturer's or factory worker's salary. And so I'm a strong supporter of building more affordable housing, particularly in transit communities, and not for just NIMBYism. I mean, I think we have to really look at the entire community and how we're going to have the next generation live here, and also people who work here be able to live here. Let me end by thanking everyone again for coming out to the town hall. I'm always heartened when I'm back home by the incredible diversity in our community, by someone once said in the morning, they said, well, you don't get asked any hard questions. Well, I've got to ask some hard questions. But, you know, I fundamentally think that the challenge for our nation is a challenge of our democracy. It's a question of, are we going to be able to knit this country back together? Are we going to be able to talk to each other with basic respect? Are we going to be able to recognize that the son of an immigrant whose grandparents fought in India's independence movement can talk to someone whose grandparents fought in World War II? That's what we do every day in our district. And that's why our district and these conversations, I genuinely believe, can be a model and will be a model for the future of America. And in the long run, that's going to win. Thank you for being here.